Okay, hello and welcome everyone to our parallel event entitled Far-Right Narratives, Key Trends Linked to Poverty Context, that's organized by Noor. My name is Ana Avelenda. I am based in Uruguay and I'm organizing lead at Noor. Together with my friend and colleague that's sitting right there, Sabka Abbas, who's based in India, and we will be the moderators for this event. We'll have two moderators. I'll be in the first part, and Sabika more in the comments and questions section. So Noor is a global feminist network and think and do tank that focuses on challenging the far right and anti-rights movements and advancing feminist visions. A few house rules before we begin. This is an unapologetic feminist, anti-racist, anti-colonialist meeting. So if you feel already that you're not aligned with these values, we just want you to know this very explicitly. We will be sound recording this meeting as well and taking a few pictures, but if any of you has any problem with having your picture taken, please let us know and we'll make sure to remove, because some pictures will be used for social media. Yes, so let me present today the speakers that we will have. On my far left, Noor Shamim is a feminist activist and human rights lawyer with roots in Pakistan, with a focus on investigating and challenging the global far right and transnational organizing. She is our executive director of Noor and is founder, alongside an amazing group of co-conspirators, many of whom are here. So she will introduce Noor's work and history and the reasons why we're here to present some of the key findings.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to say at the outset, mics can act up. So if you cannot hear me or if I am booming in your ears really loudly, could you just wave your arms around? I would appreciate it. Thank you. It's a huge pleasure to welcome you all to this space and to this event in which, as you might have heard, we'll be sharing some findings from these amazing researchers sitting here at this table from Noor's upcoming reports that are discussing far-right and anti-rights trends in the SWANA, South Asia, and Southeast Asia regions. So I also wanted to say that we can see a lot of expertise and experience within this room, right? We're excited and grateful that you've joined us for this, and we hope that it will be an interactive discussion. We really want to hear from your experiences and what you have to say. So thank you so much for all attending, and a big thanks again to the esteemed panel of speakers that are coming up in just one moment. As Anna warned, I will say a little bit about Noor, but I'll keep it short, a little bit of context, and then we can dive into the meat of it. Noor is indeed, it's a global feminist and movement-driven think and do tank, devoted to building the power of gender justice and progressive movements to obstruct far-right agendas and to advance our transformative visions. And to that end, just briefly, we coordinate an emergent transnational network. We work to expose and oppose the resurgent right and build narrative power. And we focus on trying to facilitate, amongst those of us who are trying to challenge these forces, strategic alignment and strategy development. Ultimately, what we're aiming to do is to help organize, to help bring systemic alternatives to fascism, fundamentalisms, colonialism, and capitalism into reality. I'll mention a little bit also, I think Anna alluded to it a bit, but a little bit about our values here. I'd say that we all believe Noor we're a feminist, where we understand feminism as transformative and intersectional and grounded in a power analysis. And in fact, we aim to uncover to stand clearly against actors and discourses that attempt to appropriate or weaponize feminism for discrimination and violence, including militarism or colonialist projects. We're anti-colonial, we're anti-capitalist, we're anti-racist, and we are committed to social justice, equality, human rights, and deep democracy, and to structural transformation. Just a little bit in terms of kind of why we're here, context-wise, right? We know it's a moment of multiplying global crises, and consequently of the rising power of the right, capitalizing on these crises. Across regions, we know that today, over 75% of the world population is living in political systems characterized by authoritarianism, fascism, and or rising de-democratization. And we wanted to name some systemic drivers and some ideologies that are into play, right? So some of the key ideologies we see as underpinning these trends include, of course, authoritarianism and or fascism, characterized by a concentration of power, repression, and the construction of enemy others. Also the ideologies of fundamentalisms, right? About the strategic manipulation of cultural and religion and use of extreme interpretations to achieve power, money, and extend social control. And we wanted to also name the role of capitalist systems and the ideology of neoliberalism in terms of the sort of burgeoning sense of these trends and the mutual reinforcement between these as well. A couple of structural drivers that will be coming out as well in terms of the reports and the presentations, in terms of the rising right in many countries. Certainly the role of severe inequality and of corporate power and corporate capture, where we see neoliberal policies breeding hardship and resentment that can be harnessed into support for the resurgent right. Ethno-nationalist movements and parties who define the nation in racist, xenophobic, and other exclusionary ways. Spiraling processes of securitization and militarization, anti-migrant, attacks on a number of communities, and of course theocratic religious movements and fundamentalist movements who provide a mass base, right, for regressive governance and ideas around gender and sexuality. And these all, as we all have experienced and continue to experience, they all act and operate to undermine feminist organizing, right? And so we're seeing feminist movements facing increasingly repressive and securitized environments and greater attacks on their legitimacy and security. Lastly on this, I'll sort of name the not elephant in the room because we know, but the part about gender and sexuality, right? So we know that these anti-feminist, anti-rights trends, firstly, in terms of fundamentalisms and fascisms, that gender and sexuality is central to their ideologies, right? Rooted in heteronormativity and misogyny, and secondly, it's also tactical, right? Where we see these anti-rights and anti-democratic movements mobilizing around gender and sexuality tactically to increase their political and social power and control, with bodies and autonomy used as a symbol and a pawn in a struggle to appropriate institutional power. So Noor is excited about these upcoming reports. No pressure. No. We're excited about these upcoming reports that I alluded to and that we'll be talking about today. And where it's, just to sort of set up the ground, one of our meta strategies is exposing and opposing fundamentalist and fascist movements. Knowledge building that's aiming to be actionable and accessible in concert with working with partners, so that feminist and progressive movements are supported in terms of opposing these movements and actors, both at the local level and transnationally. Wanted to name the fact that there's been significant flourishing of knowledge building and knowledge production on anti-rights and anti-gender movements over the past decade especially, right? And to some extent in terms of funding flows, actors, discourses, tactics, and impacts, especially with a large amount of knowledge created around multilateral spaces, trends in Europe, trends in Latin America, trends in North America, and on Christian fundamentalisms, right? And at the same time, we also know that there are much longer histories of feminist challenges, analysis, and advocacy around fundamentalisms and authoritarianism in the global south, right? Including the SWANA region, Asia Pacific, Africa, work on Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim fundamentalisms. But in these kinds of far-right, anti-rights discussions, especially at the UN and these kinds of spaces, these are much less frequently discussed. The connections and the parallels are often not made. And that's one of the pieces that we're aiming to address with these reports and this discussion, looking to amplify these and deep dive into the work. And so these two upcoming reports are Noor's first steps in what is going to be an ongoing project, right? Identifying key initial research questions in relation to the far-right and anti-rights movements in the SWANA and South and Southeast Asia regions, with plans to develop a similar report focusing on Western and Central Africa in the near future, and seeking to unpack in this discussion and going forward some key and emergent trends to visualize material, discursive, and tactical relationships between authoritarian and fundamentalist and fascist actors in these regions, and also interregional links. And looking ahead, our aim is together with the network, together with allies and partners, to also look at what we can do in terms of translating this research into action, especially collective action, right? So we'd love to start discussing here and in the future, in the near future, how this and all of the work that we've all been doing in terms of building knowledge can inform future modes of feminist resistance and joint action. So, without further ado, excited to host this discussion with these amazing researchers, sharing some of their findings and also hearing from you.
Thank you, Noreen. So without further ado, let's hear from our researchers. To my near left now is Nada Khwafa, a researcher from Cairo, Egypt, who recently started as co-AD of the anti-racist movement based in Lebanon. Let's hear first from Nada from the SWANA region. The key questions that we kind of wanted to ask Nada as a way of framing her presentation is, what are the key 3 to 4 key observations from your region? And what has been the role of economic crisis, including the increase in poverty levels due to the rising cost of living, in pushing far-right and anti-rights actors into power in the regions? So, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll just start by saying that when we started conceptualizing this research paper, it was around October of last year. And it was a very interesting time to start thinking about anti-rights in the region. First, because it was very sort of disorienting, since we did not know what the region would even look like in a couple of months when we do, say these findings. And I think for all of us, it was and still is very difficult to think of anything else other than the genocide in Gaza when we're thinking about the region. I would argue that there's no better time to speak of fascism and fundamentalism, as is now when Israel is, as we speak, justifying the killing of thousands and the stripping of rights of Palestinians' right to eat, to have access to medical care, and to basically stay alive. And although the genocide is, of course, not closely equal to any anti-rights movement, but it does follow a very similar playbook of othering population to the extent that violence is then merely seen as a necessary measure that can and should be taken in order to protect the nation state and protect the greater good from the evil. And I cannot think of another time that is more frightening for our queer movements than at a time when a rainbow flag has been waved on top of Gaza's rubble by an IDF soldier, as if to say that queer movements in our region are non-existent, which is always an argument that anti-rights actors use to regress our rights on the premise that they are against our culture, and on the premise that our cultures are homogeneous. Implying that we are waiting for Zionists to free us from our own communities, or that any queer person that believes in liberation for all would not be pro-Palestine. So starting off with that, so there's really not much that has been, as Noreen was saying, there's a gap in knowledge in this region. And what we did was basically we just kind of looked at a couple of standout incidents over the past 5 years. And we started digging into them to, find, to figure out the context and to also find like trends, similar trends within the region. So what I'll be doing is that I'll just be telling you a few of the trends that that I found are prevalent. And let me start with Iraq. Because there's nothing more bluntly and obviously anti-gender than a country quite literally wanting to cancel the word gender. So, in August of 2023, Iraq's media regulator ordered all media outlets to stop using the word gender and to stop using the word homosexuality and to use the words sexual deviance instead of homosexuality, which is extremely dangerous, especially in a country like Iraq when homosexuality is not explicitly outlawed, but it is practically criminalized using penal codes with loosely defined moral clauses. And Iraq is just a window. Like when we look deeper into the case of Iraq, we can see that this is very much, it was very much a continuation of a trend of them trying to curb freedom of expression and using cyber surveillance as, under the guise of protecting morality. Earlier that year, in January 2003, the Minister of Interior in Iraq formed a committee to monitor indecent content on social media, saying that this content undermines the values of the Iraqi family. And that was followed by a series of arrests, one of which is of a woman who posted a video of herself dancing in a stadium, and she was arrested for that because she was violating Iraqi family values. What is especially interesting about Iraq is that it's very sort of blunt. So, meaning that while we see sometimes, people acting as informants to the government, but informally, Iraq actually set up a platform called Balagh platform, and it posted a video telling people to please report indecent content that they see online, and they will start arresting these people. And they claim that they got 90,000 reports in the first month. So what happened in Iraq is far from unique. The closest case we can see is that of Egypt, where same thing happened. Egypt started cracking down on women who were using TikTok and who were posting videos of themselves dancing on TikTok on the grounds that they are violating Egyptian family values. But a larger also trend across the whole region, including in Jordan, UAE, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, you name it, is the use of cybercrime legislation, which is originally meant to protect individuals and states from breach in privacy and ensure data security, to instead curb freedom of expression. So we have this trend of vaguely, very loosely worded laws that are all that are being used to arrest everyone, not only women, but political opponents, comedians, activists, members of the LGBT community. So, and all of this under the guise of protecting public morals, but it's actually, to protect the state to either use people as scapegoats or to protect the state from criticism. And beyond that, we find that states are not only trying to control what people can say, but we have also been seeing states using trolls and bot armies to create their own narratives. We've seen Twitter having to remove thousands of accounts, for example, linked to the Saudi government and linked to the UAE government. We're seeing Israel do this as well. And also important to note here is that we're also seeing some countries that are really working on improving their technological capabilities to ramp up surveillance. And we're seeing Israeli spyware revenues rocket especially after they had signed Abraham Accords, and UAE started to cooperate more closely. Sorry, just 1 second. And the UAE started to cooperate more closely with Israel, buying their spyware. And actually, one of the reasons why Israel's cybersecurity industry is becoming is booming is because they basically have a blank check to field test their surveillance on Palestinians, who, of course, to them have absolutely no right to privacy. These technologies are also being used against migrants. For example, in Qatar, since face recognition technologies can now classify faces based on their perceived ethnicity or race. So this is the first main observation or main trend that we're seeing. And it's just a very worrying trend of states using public morality to crack down on anything they don't like, basically. And we're seeing states engage the public, encouraging them to rat each other out, basically. And we're seeing we're seeing geopolitical shifts that are strengthening the technological surveillance capabilities of some countries within the region and yielding profit to Israeli companies. Another trend that we looked at is anti-black sentiment and racism. And the window to this was that in 2023, Kais Saied, Tunisian president, was talking in one of his speeches, and he mentioned that there is a criminal arrangement to change the demographic composition of Tunisia in order to settle irregular migrants from sub-Saharan Africa and replace Tunisians. Now we talked about, we always talk about how right-wing discourse travels and, how some regions import discourses from other regions, but this is a very, blunt example of that, because it is right out of the playbook of the Great Replacement theory, which was used by European populists to say that the African migrants are descending onto them and attempting to change the geography of their nation, and it's being used by the president of Tunisia. Now, across several countries in the region, there is anti-black sentiment because there is still connection in the popular imagination between slavery and blackness. And this is mostly very much denied. You would find people making jokes about a person's skin color and just passing it off as just a joke and just humor. And you would find the very same person being very on board with Black Lives Matter. People don't really make this connection. The anti-black racism is a thing in the region, although it very much is. And you can even see this in, for example, in Morocco, there are some online groups that are associated with the national Moorish movement, which vows to make Morocco great again, and to push for Morocco to stay Moroccan. And they're against what they believe to be black Africans replacing Moroccans and changing the social makeup of the country, and they're calling on Moroccan women to not marry black migrants. So it is very much alive, and the president's remarks played on this. And right after, there was a wave of violence on the ground from Tunisians against migrants, and there was also an increase in discourse online that presented migrants as these deviants, and this is also very classic. They presented them as saying that they eat their cats, posting pictures of them drinking and shaming them for drinking, and saying that they're just, these people are just deviants and they want to, they want to just take over. In Egypt, we also saw that there was, a couple of years ago, there was a Netflix documentary about Cleopatra, and the actress that was playing, was playing Cleopatra was black, and there was this whole, hell broke loose. To the extent that a state-owned broadcaster then vowed to make Egypt's own Cleopatra movie. Just to... So the case of Tunisia is not only a window into anti-black racism within the region, but it's also a window into how the rise of far-right governments globally and authoritarian regimes in the region are a match made in hell. In this specific case, Tunisia is one of the main departure points to Europe. And because the right-wing governments, especially Meloni, they did not want migrants to cross, there is, the side is getting away with atrocious human rights abuses, including that Tunisian security forces rounded up sub-Saharan African migrants and dropped them in the desert near the Libyan border with no access to food, water, or shelter. A couple of months later, the Italian government still wanted to make a migration deal with them and give them money, which Tunisia very much needs because it's in a crisis. But yeah, this is just what we, this is the trend that we see is conflict and poverty context in sub-Saharan Africa driving migrants up to northern African countries, where some of them are trying to get to Europe. North African countries, there is a lot of anti-black sentiment and racism already prevalent. Authoritarian regimes are on the rise and they're in deep economic trouble, and they just scapegoat the migrants, and the West lets it happen, or even uses them just as long as these migrants are kept away from Europe and the West. Something else that we are seeing is a trend in, we're seeing a backlash on LGBT rights, but this is not really something, that real trend we're seeing is non-state actors. So, the government has always cracked down on LGBT communities, it's not new. What has been sort of new is, for example, the rise of this group called Soldiers of God, neoliberal, in Lebanon. And these people, they are, you go onto their Facebook page, it's a combination, it's a very strange combination between posts about Jesus and gospel posts, and posts about men, they're very much macho and like masculine and muscular, so posts of them posing with their tattoos and with their muscles, and then posts about anti-vaccines. I post about that vaccines are that COVID is the conspiracy and just the anti-vaxxer, and anti-LGBT rhetoric, and they in Lebanon specifically, it has been a haven, or it has been tolerant in some way to LGBT rights in the region. It's been known for that, but it has the past couple of years. There's been a really strong backlash, and Jnun al-Rab are part of that. But there's also Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah saying that, inciting violence against queers and saying that same-sex relations are sexual perversion. There's also the Ministry of Interior issuing an unlawful directive that bans LGBT gatherings. So they're really seeing a backlash, considering that Lebanon was, it's one of the first countries in the region to have a Pride March, for example. However, in 2022, that was attacked by Jnun al-Rab. And one other, so on non-state actors that attack specifically LGBT rights is a campaign called Fitra that we saw in 2022. And Fitra is an Arabic word that means human instinct. And the campaign was designed by 3 Egyptian marketing professionals and went on to be picked up by several countries. And this is the first we've seen of this kind of like a regional campaign that is very much, it seemed very organized. It seemed very like they had a slogan and everything. It's just like full-fledged campaign. And yeah, they it spread a bit in 2022, then it was removed by Facebook.
How do you spell that? Fitra?
Fitra, F-E-T-R-A. Then it was removed by Facebook, and the interesting thing is, I mean, it had reached 2 million followers, and then when it was removed, several alternative Facebook pages popped up, and it turned out that these Facebook pages were actually, some of them were, one of the pages was originally Arab National Movement in Yemen, and it changed its name to be all of a sudden Fitra. There's a couple of Moroccan groups, also nationalist groups, that just changed their name and they started posting about anti-LGBT. So there's some sort of there's something going on there. This campaign is really sketchy. It was working for a year before that. It has a lot of links apparently in the region. And the last trend I will talk about today is the manosphere, which manosphere is sort of it means men's rights groups that operate online and offline. And so there are dozens of these groups popping up, and they are all sort of, they call themselves the Red Pill movement. And there is also a male separatist movement that seems to be, they call themselves men who go the other way. And they're completely obsessed with very bad dating advice, and they think, the latest campaign, for example, that they did, and these groups are very much interconnected, like in the, so you'd find something you'd find a campaign in Morocco and it immediately gets picked up in Algeria, immediately gets picked up in Egypt. It's very, very interconnected. And the last one was, do not marry an employee, which means do not marry a woman who works. Do not marry ما تتجوزش موظفة, it's in Arabic, so yeah, and they're just talking about how these women, they're going to tell you that they want to work, but they're going to go to work and they're going to make out with their bosses and they're going to do all these things. And a lot of these groups are also talking about personal status laws and about the rights of men and children after divorce. There's actually an NGO that was created in Egypt that is specifically for, it's the first one of its kind, like specifically for the rights of men and children. So these kind of groups are really just more about relationships with women, and like that either don't marry women or either marry certain types of women, or either how do you deal when a woman rejects you, and just really bad dating, like really bad relationship advice and that sort of thing. And what is interesting about them is that they are very much interconnected, and that they're very much also, this is the place where you would find translated like Andrew Tate videos and just a bunch of translated right-wing content. These are a couple of trends that we found, and I think in terms of the question was about poverty context. So I think in a lot of this, it's so much scapegoating. It's in the case of Tunisia, in the case of Lebanon is in a huge financial crisis. Tunisia, all of it is just scapegoating either migrants, either gay people, either women, and trying to throw the blame on that it's not the state that is failing. It is that women are dancing on TikTok. That's why that's why your life is awful. It's because women are dancing on TikTok, not because the country is in severe debt. And I think also in terms of, a very clear one is in terms of migration, and in terms of what a country being in debt can, for example, in Tunisia, the point was that it was really very much in debt, and if someone offers you money to keep migrants, then that's a good deal. And I think this is something we should really be wary about with what's happening now in Gaza. And we know that Egypt is in severe debt, and we know that there's so much pressure to get Gazans out of Gaza. Countries being in poverty really just enables an environment where very horrible things can happen. And what we saw in, for example, the don't marry an employee or don't marry a woman who works is also very much about unemployment. And it's about Moroccan men. This was a Moroccan campaign about Moroccan men feeling that they don't have access to employment, although female labor participation in the region is lowest. It's 20s, 22, 23 across the region. But people feel that women are the problem. Women shouldn't work. It's not that there is an unemployment problem. Yeah.
Feels weird to clap, exactly. Thank you so much, Nada. Please hold on. I know we have comments and questions to ask, but we'll have a dedicated section to that. Sorry. So next we're going to hear from two other researchers. To my near right, Sabrine Chavez. She's a policy expert on sexual reproductive health and rights and gender and social inclusion, and researcher from Pakistan. And to my far right, not meaning that you're far right, is Suba, and I will let you spell your last name yourself because I will do a disaster. She's a feminist activist, researcher, and communicator from Colombo, Sri Lanka. So,
hi, good afternoon, everyone. Ramadan Mubarak. Hope everyone is surviving CSW well, or as well as we can at the moment. Thanks, Noreen and Noor team for having us, and thanks, Nada, I think, for really setting the context so well. Like, while you were speaking, I was just making so many connections. And I think those will emerge for you all as well. But I think I had the privilege of working as a team with Samreen on South Asia and Southeast Asia. And we decided that I would kind of maybe tell you all a little bit about how we set out to map the region, so that it contextualizes a little bit, what we found. So when we talked with Noor, they interestingly didn't give us many parameters, which on one hand is very exciting, and on the other is also quite overwhelming because we didn't really know where it could stop, because really there's just so much that's happening, and that's true for anywhere in the world right now. So we tried to do a little bit of framing ourselves as a result of that. And I think we decided that we would primarily be looking at actors that were aiming to capture sort of mainstream political power, or had already in some contexts, many contexts they already have. Through the utilization of populism, relying on existing social biases and hatred and hierarchies in order to amass and continue to accumulate social and economic power. And we also decided to kind of look at actors that, like I said, had really captured state institutions, democratic institutions, and so were really legally, carrying out widespread criminalization, attacks, violence, incarceration, and they were doing it by subverting law, legal instruments, court processes, etc., right? So we're no longer really looking at an era of extrajudicial. These are just the people that run our countries, and so that's what it looks like to carry out the law in many of the countries that we looked at. So that's just a little bit about how we tried to give ourselves some parameters. Of course, as feminists, we are interested in gender, but we also, of course, were interested in taking an approach beyond traditional gender issues. So we really looked at wide-ranging impact on communities that are already impacted by gender, sex, sexuality regimes. So not really trying to get away from a traditional gender lens. So some of the key, so I'll be talking about South Asia, and just as a disclaimer and as a bit of transparency, I'm Sri Lankan, I'm from Colombo, but I haven't lived in Sri Lanka since 2021, as is, I think, very common, and I think it's true for both of us. We experienced migration, and so I live in New York, and I know that, again, that in this room there's a lot of on-the-ground expertise as well from my region. So I really hope to hear more from you as well. So one of the key issues that I wanted to draw your attention to is the increasing vulnerability of South Asian communities to climate change disaster and the management, or rather mismanagement, of climate change response, and the incredible impact on on communities that are already living in pretty much enforced poverty, right? This is like when we're talking about economic collapse, this is not just, this is not in like generational poverty. Many people in the region have fallen into poverty in the last 5 years from, very different social and economic conditions in an enforced way. Because of the people that are leading these countries. So if you look at the kind of impact of climate change on Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, incredible just loss of life in social infrastructure, residential infrastructure, incredible harmful impact on people with disabilities, elderly people, young children, interruptions to education. It's just actually quite alarming. And then on the other hand, we have, in contexts like India, the total co-option of a climate agenda, of a sustainability agenda, and greenwashing, Hindu supremacism, while on one hand in international spaces and at the national policy level, while continuing to target, destroy, kill forest-dwelling communities that we know are the best custodians of forest land, which is incredibly important in a country like India, which is about the 4th highest, I think, emitter of CO2 in the whole world. So you have this incredible and very blatant hypocrisy of which they're not ashamed, completely comfortable, it's not hidden, it's just, huge co-option of climate agenda. And I think, Sabika, you made the point yesterday while we were speaking. I think it's really important to remind you all that when we talk about anti-rights conservative actors, here in the US, for example, we have climate denialism, but that's not true for all conservative actors, right? You get the case of Egypt, the case of India, where they're not denying, but they're taking over the climate agenda, they're lying, and they are cashing in, basically. They're creating partnerships with corporations and with other wealthy global north states to co-opt this agenda. The second issue I wanted to raise was what I think is useful to call the criminalization of poverty. So combined with the fact that, I just said poverty is it's enforced, it's state policy at this point, right, in many countries, and then criminalizing you for being poor while making you poor, right? So we're seeing, like for example, in Sri Lanka, the securitization and the militarization of a so-called war on drugs, with huge nexus to also a so-called war on terror. So these kind of agendas of, national security agenda, military, so that justifies bringing in military and security forces with, sweeping powers granted to law enforcement and the military to make, we're talking thousands of arrests in a day, just indiscriminate, no trial, no conviction, no cause, just incarcerating thousands upon thousands of people, and then subjecting them to all kinds of, bizarre programs like compulsory drug treatment. I mean, basically, it's prison. That's what you're talking about. And that combined with the huge overcrowding of prisons, already huge issues with prisoners' rights in South Asia, as we know. So this is another ongoing issue. In India, we had, for example, ongoing criminalization of, what they call begging, so people on the street, finding a way to live, basically, people who are either using that street-based sex work, or people also use that. So incredible policing of public space with impact on a lot of trans folks who are unhoused or live in those conditions, a lot of street-based sex workers, as well as just other poor people. But that also tends to happen around a big convention, right? In India, we saw during various international, when they're hosting international conventions, they literally, sort of disappear all the poor people. It means they're sent to prison. They don't actually disappear. They are permanently sent away to prison where nobody can. You don't have to see it. So this is an ongoing issue, and really, I think in places like Sri Lanka, the sort of involvement of security in military forces is very concerning. Obviously, we're talking all of this in a context of total economic collapse. It's no longer mild. State really of total economic collapse in many places like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and interventions by international parties like the IMF in all those three countries. For example, new partnerships with the International Monetary Fund. This means that there's been an extremely poor, dire climate for activism, public uprising, public movements, huge violence against activists, journalists. But like I said, much more formal, in formal ways and formal settings. So, just again, arrests, incarceration, etc. The last thing I want to say, of course, is that I do want to mention that, again, the absolute erosion of rights for women, girls, and sexual and gender diverse people. For example, in Pakistan, for many years, we had quite a progressive piece of legislation that protected the rights of trans people, which was really, kind of leader for the region. It was certainly, much better than most other neighboring countries. Now, that had stood since 2018. It had really been a major victory. Now, that's being attacked in religious courts, in the Sharia courts, and is being called un-Islamic, which I think is, again, something like in Malaysia, what's happening in Malaysia. The moment you say something is an insult to Islam, or in India, if you say anti-national, it signals that to then visit violence upon this person is justified. It's accepted, it's okay. Here come the trolls, right? And obviously it's fine to now abuse this person. So it's the same. This un-Islamic label has now been given to the transgender rights bill in Pakistan, and unfortunately this incredible victory that trans movements in the region had is now again at risk. And a lot of hateful anti-trans rhetoric in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, which we find eerily similar to anti-trans feminist, so-called feminist rhetoric from places like the UK. So TERF rhetoric that has absolutely no actual relevance to what is going on in a place like Sri Lanka, where the situation for trans people is very dire, and you still live in basically a state of needing to submit yourself to medical and psychiatric checks in order to access legal gender recognition. But there are Sri Lankan TERFs who are spreading disinformation with very big platforms, very public influential figures, spreading disinformation about legal gender recognition when it's not even happening in Sri Lanka. It's not even on the negotiating table. So it's just and there are some people who openly say, oh, I came into this because I saw J.K. Rowling speak. And this is true of, influential social media influencers in Pakistan who are young women who are on social media, who are attacking the trans rights agenda, as well as in places like Sri Lanka. We also have burgeoning men's rights discourse, a lot of, again, very elite, very highly educated men referencing Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate on Sri Lankan social media platforms. I think the last thing I wanted to say was the point on disinformation. And in the MENA region, I know that there's been a lot of good data on the sort of deployment of bots and trolls, which is really scary, but also just the blatant sharing of disinformation by political figures, public figures, just on mainstream media or just whenever they talk. So while I think the technical and automated aspects of the disinformation sort of ecosystem is very important to pay attention to, I don't think we should be overly focused on this as though it's all technology and it's automated and it's bots and trolls. There's also just every day you turn on the TV or you look at a mainstream newspaper or you listen to any politician talk, they're just openly lying. And millions of people are hearing that, right? So I think it's also really important to concretely keep our eyes on the human actors who are just, blatantly, they know they're lying and they're not swayed by it. So I think I'll just stop there for now and I'll hand over to my colleague Samreen, and I'm sure we can come back to connections and stuff as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva, and thank you, Nada, for setting the context. So in our report, we are also talking about mapping of various actors that are promoting these narratives. So I'll be talking about a little bit about those actors, and then I'll share some recent legislative and policy developments in Southeast Asia region. So as Shiva mentioned, we are focusing on South Asia and Southeast Asia. So I'm taking over, leading the component on Southeast Asia. And just to be, transparent, I'm originally from Pakistan, but have lived in Malaysia for several years and also in Thailand for a couple of years. However, as I'm not from the region per se, there is I realize that there's more regional expertise present in the room, and looking forward to receiving feedback and input from your end. Going back to the mapping of actors, so I'll go back a little bit in the history. So we have some old actors who are still there, and we also have some new and emerging actors who are now joining this landscape. So for Indonesia, for instance, we have religious political actors that have always held a stronghold in the political spheres of the country, and they have actively promoted the argument that Indonesia's law, Indonesia's constitution and legislative provisions should be framed and structured around Sharia and Islamic law. And there's one particular interpretation of Sharia and Islamic law which is being promoted by these actors. They are very influential in public spaces, in political spaces, and they gained more power after Suharto's regime was toppled. And they're so influential that in some provinces like Aceh, now they have been able to get regulations in place that gives Sharia law supremacy over other federal laws, so-called secular federal laws. Moving to Philippines, the Catholic Church has a very strong following till this day. The church has a strong influence in the political spheres as well, so much so that it played a very important role in the 86 and 2000 toppling of the regimes of President Marcos. It's strong even today, and a very vocal and strong opponent of all discourses, all legal reforms on women's bodily rights. Even though Philippines has enacted the reproductive health law, the church continues to oppose it. The church continues to challenge women's right to divorce, women's right to access to contraceptives and other reproductive health related matters. In Malaysia, we have a very interesting landscape when it comes to actors in Malaysia. So we have these Saudi educated Muslim elites who have now returned to the country. They have received their education in the Salafist traditions of Islam, and now they have returned to the country and are promoting that narrative together with Saudi government funded local initiatives. So that was happening back in like 60s and 70s, but now they have sort of, they have gained so much power in public affairs that now they have entered into political affairs as well, and the government does not want to challenge their take on various issues. And now, and especially during Mahathir's regime, it was institutionalized as well. So Mahathir government, for instance, allowed the establishment of official Islamic institutions like JAKIN, and as well as included these actors in public affairs as part of its Islamization strategy. So now, like these actors, they were originally just operating in educational institutions and other public affairs, have now formally made part of the state institutions as well. Then we have some new actors as well. So we are seeing the trend that we have in Malaysia. We are seeing similar trend in Indonesia as well. Muslim elites who have received their education in Saudi Arabia have returned home now and are bringing that narrative, that interpretation to home. And in Thailand, we are seeing emerging political parties that are military aligned. Their interests are aligned with the military elite and military regime. We also have passive supporters of these actors. So for instance, in Malaysia and Indonesia, we have religious schools and institutions that continue to receive funding support from Salafist institutions and entities in Saudi Arabia. And we have in the Philippines conservative entities that keep receiving funding from pro-life actors and conservative churches in the US. In terms of legal reforms and how all of these conservative, regressive narratives, how they translate into legal reforms and policies, etc. I'll give you some recent examples. So, for instance, in Indonesia, the new criminal code, for instance, criminalizes any sexual act conducted outside the institution of marriage. It's so sneakily worded because just from the surface of it, the implications are not very obvious. But when you read between the lines, it's basically criminalizing any consensual same-sex act, because those marriages, like same-sex marriages, are not legally recognized in Indonesia. So any consensual same-sex sexual activity is indirectly then criminalized through this code. Indonesia also enacted a very problematic labor law. It's called the Omnibus Law. And very little discussion is taking place about this law, but it's incredibly problematic, and I'll just talk about some of the provisions in this law. One, the law, it weakens the responsibility of businesses to conduct environmental impact assessment. And this is taking place in a context where climate-related discussions, climate change-related challenges are quite evident in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia. The law also permits short-term contracting, and within that contracting process, it enables corporations and businesses to avoid and cut down workers' benefits, such as paid maternity leave, family benefits, and increments, etc. And it also perpetuates gender pay gap, and it also justifies corporations and businesses to pay less than minimum wage. I'll also just very quickly talk about Myanmar, because that's also a very important country, and a lot is taking place in that country as well. And I'm getting the reminders that we have limited time. So just very quickly to discuss Myanmar as well. So all of us are aware that there is a military rule in Myanmar, but what has happened in that during that military rule, it has resulted in displacement and also exodus of almost 1 million people from the country. That's a huge number, but very little is being discussed about all of these things in the mainstream discussive spaces. So, and also in all of the region, in all of these countries, there's also increasing a crackdown on civil society organizations. There's restricting and limiting spaces for civil society organizations and dissenting voices. So anyone who is questioning these trends is immediately shut down through various measures, including arbitrary arrests, including heightened surveillance and security and monitoring from state authorities. So I'll close there, and we can come back to this during the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Noor. That's so brilliant. Thank you for those of you who came late. What we're doing here is presenting some teasers, like 2-3 key findings, but this is ongoing research that will be published in a few months, actually, a couple of months, exactly. So now I'm handing over to the next moderator of us, so that we can have a little bit more of an interactive session. We're going to move around with the microphone. Yes.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to all of her. Thank you to Subha, Samreen, and Nada for some great interventions. I think while we were listening to all three of them, we also realized that there's so many similarities. Like we have like a whole manosphere in SWANA, but South Asia and Southeast Asia is not far from that. I mean, if you can translate Andrew Tate in Arabic, we can do it in Hindi, Urdu, and Sinhala for sure. So I think there's a lot of collaboration, knowledge exchange, knowledge creation that is happening by far-right actors in all of these regions. So thank you so much for this. I think before question and answers, I just wanted to open the floor to more interventions from various regions. And how their experience has been, or even if you are even from the same regions, are there any specific points that you would want to bring forward that contribute to the idea that we have this collaboration as well as nexus of anti-rights, anti-gender powers and actors in these spaces? So if anyone would like to respond, raise a point, or share bits from their own region and work. Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Anna from Women Human Rights Defenders International Coalition. I'm the coordinator of the coalition, and I am from Armenia, based in Armenia, which is an interesting country in the sense of it's in between Europe and Asia, and impacted by both. So this is a very dear topic to me, because in 2013 I was blacklisted by anti-gender actors in Armenia. I was one of the 60 activists blacklisted in the country. And it happened during the time when Armenia had to decide whether it is shifting towards the European Union or is continuing to be a Russian colony. And it was the time when gender became a geopolitical subject, which means that in order to manipulate the Armenian society, these groups that were certainly financed and supported by the Russian government, and I have lots of proofs of that financing. So these groups were manipulating the work and activism of feminists and anybody who was dealing with gender issues. I feel lots of similarities with other regions and contexts, but also something distinct about Armenia is that gender is being used for geopolitical games. I don't want to take too much time, but I just forwarded two pieces of research done by my friends. One is a research that studies anti-gender movements in Armenia, and the other one is a media study of anti-gender actors in Armenia. I think these are like pieces of gold, really good research pieces, and they are very relevant not only for my country but also for the whole region and internationally because of the similarities I see. And so if there is anybody who wants to receive these research pieces, you can just ask my email or you can be in touch with Noor colleagues.
Yeah, I think a very important point that Anna brought up is also that we see the kind of attack on activists, which includes blacklisting in SWANA region. That there has been freezing of bank accounts of gender rights and activists and feminists and women human rights defenders. In India, absolutely impossible for because of FCRA, difficult for them to get jobs. And also money and funding for the kind of work that we would want to do. So, anyone else from the floor?
Hi, I'm Sipali from Sri Lanka, from the Women and Media Collective, and Subha is one of our daughters, from the day she was born, of course. I just want to add something. So I think you're really very correct with the so-called war on drugs and how the military and surveillance is working together. There's also, and I know you know about this as well, the online media law that is being brought, which is ostensibly to protect women and girls from violence online. And it was brought in saying this is the way we can catch people who are taking photographs, nude photographs of young women, which is also a trend that is happening, young teenagers who are taking photographs of themselves, sharing it with their boyfriends who then put it online. And then child sexual abuse, rape of women. Now this online security law was brought in to counter that. But what it's doing is actually surveillance of all online use of all online posts, social media. So it's come to a point that we have to be very, very careful what's the text we put on our WhatsApp. And many people seem to think that WhatsApp is very safe. And I think the people who are working on online security know very well that there's very little space actually for how we can communicate unless we do lip reading or something. So when, like about 45 years ago, when another president was there, it was Premadasa, during the 1971, during the 1988 actually, when they came down on so-called terrorists, we were, as activists, that's when feminists, we and human rights advocates, we came to a point where if you're traveling in the public transport, we don't talk about anything that made, we don't say, are you meeting, did you meet so-and-so, did that person say, you know what, nothing. We just get in the bus and we go, we don't talk about it. Now it's come to the point where we have to watch what we put online. So some of us are still putting our stuff online, but we know that at any point it can get interpreted as something that is violating the dignity and the cultural norms of Sri Lankan women. We don't know what that is, but that's what's been targeted.
Just to add, I know very similar legislation in Bangladesh, which, and again, I think this is true of many countries, the disguise of legislation that expands surveillance infrastructure, brings more resources to surveillance infrastructure, more sophisticated surveillance infrastructure on the guise of protecting citizens' right to privacy, right to protecting women, protecting young women, girls, etc. So I know that in Bangladesh as well, with the latest iteration, I think in 2022, right, so-called Data Protection Act. Again, that protecting data. None of these legislations are necessarily coming from political contexts where we can have great confidence that there is a sort of a philosophy of a respect for privacy, right? It's just not. So neither in the Bangladeshi context or in the Sri Lankan context or in the Indian context or any of these places do we see the state act in consideration for our right to privacy in any other way. So then suddenly this inflated desire to protect our data, to protect our bodies, to protect our rights to privacy, I think correctly is very suspicious, and I think is in many cases being used to surveil and also to again arrest and incarcerate. So I think just a connection there with Bangladesh as well. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tasafi from Bangladesh. And this is something that has happened very recently in the last few months. Talking about like a lot of the issues that came up, those are very real for us. But given the Bangladesh context, there's the Hijra community, which has been, which is part of the larger trans community. And there's been space, because of the traditional context of the community, there's been space for a lot more conversation in terms of transgender rights. And we've seen things moving forward in the last few years. So in October, the new curriculum for this, for the school books came out, which included a chapter which talked about transgender identities. And since then, we've been seeing a huge backlash of it, mainly starting from online spaces, led by 3 or 4 men. And looking back, we can see that they've been working on this for a while. They've been like doing research, creating like documents on who's been working around transgender rights. And their whole narrative that they're using right now is basically because homosexuality is criminalized in Bangladesh under the 377 Act. So basically linking transgender identity with the LGBT identity and thus leveraging that as criminal, promoting criminal acts. And creating like similar things, like creating lists of organizations who've been working on it, people who've been working on it, which kind of took us by surprise, because I think overall in the queer movement context, the idea has been that because we have been able to talk about transgender issues, there's a transgender bill, which is kind of in the process, not the best bill or policy, but at least it's in conversation. We had the state on board in some ways. And then suddenly that itself being turned into this rhetoric with mass public display of disregard for the identity or acceptance. So yeah, it really like makes us stop and take a breath and try to understand what then that looks like now in terms of taking the movement forward.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting your research. It was really, really interesting. And my name is Yusra. I'm from Egypt. I'm the executive director of the Women Human Rights Defenders Coalition in Eastern North Africa. And I guess I just want to think out loud with the people in the room and with the experts here about what many of you actually on the panel did, which is framing this analysis in sort of a material analysis and an understanding of the wider context of economic power relations between North and South in general, and whether we can expand our definition or analysis of anti-rights to also think about the languages, discourses, processes that deny people in the global South basic economic rights. And this obviously is the analytical, trip up here that makes it a bit difficult in terms of categorization is that a lot of the countries that in multilateral spaces like these states that are traditionally pro-rights, so Western European, American, Canada, whatever, are also the same countries enabling the structural adjustment programs, IMF interventions, etc., that are basically visiting extreme poverty on a lot of the global South and climate catastrophe. And I think our right to survive is a very basic right, but we don't have the language to talk about it, I think, still necessarily in terms of this anti-rights analysis. So that's one thing about language. And the other thing is, it's also about language, but it's, I just want to problematize the ease with which we use this language, because the language of rights and the language of human rights, the language of civil rights, etc., has been used historically and currently to colonize people in the global South and to say that they are not civilized enough, not whatever. Hamas doesn't love the rainbow flag, etc. And this is something that's going to continue to be used against us, both by internal actors in our countries in the global South and by Western actors as well. And then the third part of that is that the I think is, I guess, less of a point than maybe an alarm, something that's alarming a lot of us in the global South, and especially people who are active in pro-feminist spaces, etc., is that the massive failure of the Western liberal regime to produce democracy, human rights in general, and that's being broadcast over the past 6 months very graphically in Gaza, is endangering all of us. It's endangering all of us who try to use this language and defend any kinds of rights anywhere. And so we are going to start, and it's already happened. It's already happened in Egypt. We've been seeing like Facebook posts trying to gradually kind of make the argument that feminists, it's already been an argument that feminists are, Western in position, but, why not call them Zionists now too? So it's that kind of thing. So it's really, really dangerous for us. So I don't have, I guess, very well formulated thoughts, but these are some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of these issues, and I hope that you guys can help me flesh them out further. Thank you.
Just before that, I'm just passing on these 2 sheets of papers in case you want to stay in touch with Noor and be part of our Block and Build mailing list and know more about the upcoming reports and all the work we're doing. Please feel free to add your name, affiliation, and email for us. But yeah.
Hello, my name is Catalina. I'm a journalist and feminist activist from Latin America, Colombia, and Mexico. And I find something that's very interesting because we are seeing the same trends. a rise of authoritarian, anti-rights governments. I don't want to say right or left because we have both. And what they have in common is that they are authoritarian and anti-rights, and they are connected with all of the discourses: anti-migration, anti-vaccines, manosphere, also trans-exclusive. Feminism is growing very rapidly in the region. But something that's very interesting to me is that lately the feminist movements in Latin America have been blamed for the rise of these movements, especially the rise of the manosphere, but pretty much all of them. And the argument is, since you had these advancements like the abortion law in Argentina, the abortion sentence in Colombia, decriminalization and abortion in Mexico, and a lot of advances in the last 10 years. So this is framed as a reaction to that, as a feminist, as if we went too far. But what I find that it's very interesting is that we are seeing the same trends in countries that were not experimenting these advances, specifically in the last 10 years, and it's pretty much the same. So I find it very interesting because it shows that it is not linked. It may, of course, be a response, but of course feminists are not to blame because of that. And there's something that's worrying me a lot, and since in Latin America we found out about the growth of this manosphere, and everybody's like, oh my god, what are we going to do with radicalized young men? We have to do programs for them and throw money at them and invest in them. So it's like a full circle. So now to advance feminism, we're going to spend money on men, which is just like a patriarchal loop that it's just bonkers. And I find it very worrying because I really see these trends in donors, and there's an idea that a lot of the financiation for the feminist movements should be redirected to teach men, and especially with this idea that we have to be more soft, seductive, strategic, as if we hadn't been done that a lot of times. We wrote songs, poems, we did theater, we did arts, we told them, oh baby, please be a feminist. And still that's not, I mean, if they are not feminists, it's not because we didn't try hard enough to convince them. So those are some reflections I have from the panel. Maybe you have some feedback on that.
Okay, hey everyone. Boy, this is a day of bad news, isn't it? It's bad, but I'm not going to make it better. Thank you all. Thanks so much for your brilliant analysis and warmth and solidarity. So I actually want to pick up on something that Yosra, you just made me think of, and this is it's a short story about the U.S. and the right wing and craziness around Gaza and the Israeli government's genocidal efforts. So I've never talked about this publicly, so this may come out in a convoluted way. But this is a story about how in December, for the 16 days of action against gender-based violence, a right-wing U.S. news outlet called the National Review, like a right-wing, worse than just Republican, launched a 16 days campaign on its website in which they called out 15 feminist organizations. Why they couldn't find the 16th, I don't understand, but anyway. So they called out and maligned 15 organizations like AWID, like UAF, the Urgent Action Fund, like SSEA, the SSEA Foundation. I mean, what I would call good feminist progressive organizations, all of which had made public statements in support of Palestine.
So it's a right-wing effort to condemn these feminist organizations that have made statements in support of Palestine, but the way they did it was to use language where of the women of, Awid, where are the women of Estrella? And the Estrella example it's a really interesting one. The gist of it was that the allegation was that these feminist organizations had not condemned the reports of rape by Hamas. Okay, some actually had, but that's actually beside the point. They made the allegation, in other words, they were smearing the reputations of the organizations because the organizations had supported rights of Palestinians, but they did it through maligning the organizations in ways that basically said, you don't care about sexual assault. All right, and yes, I understand that the rape and the Hamas, I understand the complications of that. But then it also got so sloppy because with Estrella in particular, the author, who was a sloppy young writer who was a recent graduate of a right-wing university in the United States, sloppy writing. She named 3 board members, assuming that they were Jewish, so there's like an extra anti-Semitic layer in calling out, naming people who we work with, by the way. The names won't surprise you, but I won't name them. But what this reporter did was she pulled names that she thought were Jewish from the feminist organizations that had made statements supporting Palestine. So in this circuitous way, they were blaming the Jewish board members for a mess. So all this to say, it's so sinister, and the U.S. right wing is grasping at anti-Muslim, anti-Palestine, anti-Arab sentiment, mixing that with a layer of anti-Semitism in order to be anti-feminist. I told you this is going to be a circuitous story. So it's an effort to smear the feminist organizations.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, all meetings should be ending by 6 o'clock. All meetings should be ending by 6 o'clock. Once again, just a reminder that all meetings should be ending at 6. Thank you very much. And be all safe.
Hector is adorable. He's a lovely guy. Anyway, so I'll stop. Thank you for allowing me to tell the circuitous story. It's just simply a set of examples of how the right wing here and everywhere are operating in sinister ways, and they're blending all of it, right? They're blending all of the forms of hatred in order, in this case, to put forward a set of agendas that can also serve to condemn feminist organizations, but they're doing that through a weird supporting of an Israeli government agenda and mobilizing anti-Semitism, and it's a mess. Like I said, it wasn't. I didn't make you feel better, did I? Thank you all so very much. Thanks.
I think we have 2 minutes, just one. Okay, yeah, just okay. If you want to add for a minute, we have a minute.
Well, thank you very much. Maria Luisa Peralta from Acajata. I live in Buenos Aires, Argentina. A lot of similarities between what you were telling about your regions and the Latin American region. I just wanted to ask a question. I don't know the time will be enough for an answer, but I wanted to know how these anti-rights actors articulate in your region, which are the networks, the international connections, and also you mentioned climate change crisis, and I wanted to know, you also have environmental degradation and extractivism there. I wanted to know where are those capitals from? Are those capitals from countries that in the international spaces are progressive on sexual and reproductive rights. That's the case in our region, so that's why I'm asking that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your interventions. I think the speakers will be available while going down to answer this question. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Noreen, Nada, Anna, Samreen, Suba, Amna, and everyone who participated. We'll stay in touch for sure. But while we move out of this room, also we wanted to take our report to think forward, because what Noor does is also research, but also thinks of ways in which we can counter the rise of the far right, the anti-rights and anti-gender actors. So what are some of the strategies that all of us are using, that we are seeing? What are some of the collaborative interventions, joint actions and strategies that we could do or are doing already to counter the rise of the right, not just in these regions, but across the globe? So thank you so much, and lots of solidarity and love.
Just if you want to continue following us,